yourself and kind of tell us how you get started in writing?
Background about myself, you just did.
I did, yeah. Anything I didn't.
I can't really add much to that.
What got you interested in writing?
I think basically it was a love of language that I came upon as I grew up. As a kid, 8 years old, I was trying to write poetry. And none of it was any good. It was awful. But I learned to rhyme. And as I moved on through my education, I had a great deal of warfare with my parents. They wanted me to go to medical school. And I complied up to a certain extent. And ultimately, I was actually, after I graduated from college, I'd taken all the pre-med courses. And I did a year of research at the Harvard School of Public Health on the defibrillator. And I was actually operating on dogs the day that they first used the defibrillator.
Wow.
And they went over to Peter Bent Brigham because they knew a guy his heart was gonna stop. And what they did is they hit him with 3,000 volts. Now I think it's like 1 or 2 volts.
I don't know, we have one in the building somewhere. So.
Yeah. And they brought him back.
Wow.
They did. They burned the hell out of him, but they brought him back. And, I mean, he didn't last more than about 8 or 9 more days, but they did that. So I had a kind of personal coming to Jesus or coming to writing moment, and I decided that I was not going to go to medical school. And I was off on a kind of personal journey of close to 10 years learning how to write novels. And it was a pleasant and unpleasant experience because it involved failure after failure. And I wrote 6 novels that were unpublishable. I did not say they weren't published. I said they were unpublishable. And then I guess I could say fairly that what happened to me was that I suddenly understood what you needed to do to write a novel. And that was that you needed to be honest. Verbally honest and spiritually honest. And within a year and a half, I'd published 2 novels.
Well, that actually leads really nicely into my next question, and if anybody else has a question along these lines, please tap in, because I ask people great questions. So what was your, go ahead.
What do you mean whenever you say you have to be honest? With your own experience, or with, how do you mean?
I would say that you have to be honest about the vision that you have and that you are trying to convey. You cannot be, what can I say? You cannot be anything but straightforward, which I guess you can call honest, with your language and with your vision of what you want to portray. Not sure that I've answered your question, but
It's almost like you have to
Yeah, that's what I mean by being honest. You have to say in fiction what it is that you feel and what it is that you see, uh, without any kind of trying to make it good. You
Or
just
fit
have to let
something.
it be.
Or fit something
Yeah.
extraneous.
So it's sort of funny because as we sit here and, we're talking and we're looking at this book, White Mama, it seems like there's a contradiction there, but, you and I talked, so I know a little bit of the backstory, but, so what was your inspiration for the book and what led you to the topic and, how did you come up with the background for the story?
We're going to be here till midnight, you know that.
There's okay till midnight.
Okay.
All right, that's good.
Um,
It's fascinating.
Well, a short story.
that book, I never had much of a problem starting a novel until that one. And I had these two characters in mind, and I could not bring them together. I wrote 160 pages trying to bring them together, and they would not come together. They simply wouldn't.
What did you start with?
Mrs. Malone, I experienced her absolutely flat firsthand. I went to New York. I was at the University of Arizona in Tucson at that time. And there's a major English department conference and interviews and stuff. And I had lived and worked in New York for 10 years. And what I loved to do in New York was to walk. And I would just go out the evening and walk. And I was up on near
What time period was this?
around late 70s.
Sure. New York is different than it was.
Pardon?
New York was a little different back then.
Oh yeah, it was filled with bag ladies. And I was on around 79th and First Avenue, and I saw this woman with two shopping bags, and she went from the sidewalk up into the steps in the area of a church. And I watched her, and she sat down and arranged her stuff, and then sort of nodded off. And the temperature was 9 degrees. And I thought to myself, what the hell is this? Because I'd never seen it. And then BT was a product of, there's a novel before White Mama that was called Peoples. And it was about a young black man named Billy Peoples and all of his kinds of stuff going on, but I'm not going to go there. But
I'm reading now.
but BT was a kind of second cousin to Billy. And the two of them, as I said, I was trying to get together. And I just couldn't do it. And so I have always believed that writing, at least for me, comes from the unconscious. It's not an intellectual exercise at all. Now, for some people it is, but for me, no. And what I decided to do was not sleep until I got the beginning of it. And I got somehow these people together. And around 4 o'clock in the morning, the first line came to me. The apartment was as clean as it has ever been. And I went to sleep. And next morning, I got up, I just started with that line, and that was it. But I just had to punish the unconscious for not providing me with what I had previously in other books so relied upon and so expected. And then I was off and running.
So did you plan what was going to happen? Because we met with another author, and she said she just goes with the flow and develops it as it comes along. Some people know exactly what they want to happen. How was yours with White Mama? Did you know what was going to happen in the end before you started it?
No,
Just kind of evolved?
I didn't know what was going to happen the next day. I really didn't. And that's the way I've always worked. And what I've always loved about writing is how it surprises me. You can be working on something and bang. And I've always told students, I said, you're writing along, everything is fine, and what I want you to do is stop at a certain point every day and write down what it is that you would write if you went on. Just make a little note. And I said, I'll bet you 10 to 1 that when you start the next day, that won't be it. And it never is. It's always something fresh and new that you did not expect. Really interesting stuff.
So you talked about, to me, about an experience, were you teaching in New York City? You had exposure to a number of these young people.
Yeah, I taught, excuse me, I taught for a year at a state-run poverty program in Bedford-Stuyvesant. I don't know if you know what Bedford-Stuyvesant is, but if you go over the Brooklyn Bridge, you go right straight into Bedford-Stuyvesant. And it makes, as I like to say, makes Harlem look like Scarsdale. It is just hell on earth. And there was a state-run program, as I said there, that had about 400 17 to 24-year-old high school dropouts that were young black men. And the faculty, if you can call it that, mostly black folk. And I was one of 2 white guys, and there were 2 white nuns. What they did, I don't know. But I got to know some of the black faculty who I adored because they were so funny. And they really picked on me as being a white guy. And there was one guy named Al Moody. I shall never forget him. About 5'4", 5'2", something like that. And he was taking no stuff from anybody. And I remember one time being in an elevator with 4 guys who were the executives of the whole program. All suits, beautifully attired, briefcases. I don't know what was in them, but anyway, they were there to take the money from the state. And Al Moody walked in one morning, and I was on the elevator, and in front of these guys, he looked at me and he said, "Good morning, white boy." And you could see these guys freeze. I said to him, "Good morning, Tiny." Yeah. We got along great. But it was really quite an interesting place. Because the guy who hired me there, as you know, I came from being a Harvard English major, and he saw this on my resume, and he said, "How's your math?" And I said, "Non-existent." He said, "You'll be perfect." And so I taught GED math. And he told me, he said, "Look, if I put you in an English class, they won't understand a word you're saying. They just won't." And so I had to learn the math along with these guys. And it was all GED stuff. It was algebra, it was basic geometry, and so on. And I just busted my butt learning that stuff again. But it was great. And there were programs associated with, it was called TRY, T-R-Y, Training Resources for Youth. And they had developed some wonderful programs with the City University of New York and Hunter College. And I saw maybe 15 or 20 of these high school dropouts, druggies, dealers, so on, go from this program to be accepted at City University of New York and Hunter College. It was a whole new clean slate for them. And it was just wonderful to see that.
So
Because
does BT come out of that experience?
yes, yeah.
So
And,
does Billy.
and Billy Peoples.
Oh,
Yeah. Billy first. And then,
What I said to him last night, I shall speak very little, but uh, we watched White Mama last night because there's that new download that's better than our CDs.
it's great.
Yeah, and I said to him, you really have to understand that for both of these stories and films, there is just this quality of goodness that was in these kids, no matter how rough or what they had done or he came to really relate to the core soul, and so I think it comes out in both books. That's it.
I think you
Yes, I
started to see
agree,
BT.
yeah. I was wondering what experience that you might have had, because
Yeah.
the characters are believable. So it's interesting to hear.
yeah, it was that whole year doing that.
Yeah.
And knowing them, and somehow I think, I don't know why or how, but I got their trust. And that led me to another level of understanding them and being able to communicate with them. And that was really great. So,
There are so many oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, you wrote this book, how did it become a movie? I mean, did somebody read it and contact you? Did you contact somebody
Coming
else?
up on that.
I was very, very fortunate. I had a pretty rotten agent when I started out. And then I was able to latch on to another agent whose name was Don Congdon. Probably nobody knows him. But he did Jaws at lunch one day. And he represented all kinds of wonderful writers.
All
I used,
creatures.
hmm?
All creatures. All creatures great and small.
Oh yeah, All Creatures Great and Small was something that he orchestrated himself. As I said, he did Jaws at lunch one day. Uh, Not a word had been written, and he organized the whole thing and
Wow.
said, "You do this, you do this, you do this," and everybody agreed. And so I had him, and what he did with White Mama is he had the manuscript in hand, and he showed it around to publishers and stuff. Nobody bid on it, or I thought it was just going to go right down the tubes. And so he got a hold of a producer that he knew in Los Angeles, and he sent him the manuscript. Now, this is not the way things are done ordinarily. Ordinarily, you sell the book and then you take the book to the producers. He just took the manuscript, unpublished, and he called me up and he said, "This guy's interested in doing a film." And he said, "Would you be interested in writing the screenplay?" And I said, "Sure." I had no idea what writing a screenplay was. I had no idea. And so that's how we took off. And he wrote a contract with this guy that said, I got X thousands of dollars if he could sell the novel before it was produced, which is the way it goes. And he didn't. But after it was produced, he sold it, which is the stuff you have in your hands. Now that took away a lot of the top money that you get for these kinds of things, but I still got plenty.
So you got Betty Davis.
And I got Betty Davis.
Yes, what was she like?
Hmm?
What was she like, Betty Davis?
She was just the loveliest, sweetest thing you ever want to see. She was at 8 o'clock every morning. She was in full costume on the set. She knew everybody's lines, knew the whole thing back and forth, complete.
Amazing.
Did you bring her autograph?
Yeah, it's over on the table.
Okay. And she autographed my script in the most lavish fashion.
Well, you need to tell the story about they tried to have somebody else write the screenplay.
Oh
after,
yeah. Well,
and Betty Davis
yeah.
said,
This happens a lot in the writing of screenplays and stuff in Hollywood. Is where the producer can do a refresh or of a script and brings in another writer to share screen credit and completely rework what you have written. And she did this. And she showed it to Betty Davis, and she showed it to me. And Betty Davis said, "If you don't go back to Bob Downs' script, I walk."
Tell them about the first line, how it started.
Say what?
How the book how the rewrite started. You had mentioned how the rewrite, the other screenplay.
how it opened?
How it opened, right.
Oh yeah, this guy had had BT standing in front of the building where Betty Davis lived, saying stuff like, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to have a white mama." which completely destroyed me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the tension between the characters. I mean, it just,
Right.
it, I mean,
Well, he had
he didn't
he
want to be there.
totally misunderstood the vernacular of the black language and what white mama really meant, and he didn't know. And anyway, she won, and the Screen Actors Guild punished her,
The one who had written them.
punished the producer for
Oh.
having done this, and I got $2,000 out of that.
Wow.
They fined her. That's what they did.
Huh.
I was stunned.
But Betty Davis really came, I mean, without her, God knows what would have happened. She said, if you don't use his screenplay, I walk. And I read the other night that they wanted to change the title. We never heard that at the time, so
No.
that could have been like a derivative handing down of whatever. But at any rate, apparently, she said, no, you don't change White Mama, I walk. So what I have over there is a copy of the screenplay, which he did write 6 times, but to make it everything they wanted. But she signed the screenplay for us and put a comment there that we'll have forever.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was great.
So was White Mama the original title?
No, as you know.
As I know.
Sneaky.
No, I was trying to be way too literary and took a line from Frost about home is the place where when you have to go there, they have to take you in.
You have put that in.
But
Who came up with the title? I don't remember.
the producer,
Okay.
Tom Moore, was the producer. And as you may have seen in the beginning of the film, he was executive producer. And the producer was Jean Moore Edwards, who was his daughter.
Is what?
His daughter.
Oh,
Yeah. Very interesting.
can you talk about the difference between writing a novel and writing a screenplay?
Oh my God.
And what they look
Hard
for.
question.
And what they look for in screenplays.
Screenplay is a collaborative adventure between you, at least for me it was, between you and the director. The writing of a novel is an intensely private thing, and there's nobody else involved. But a screenplay, as Barbara just said, I had to write the damn thing 6 times. And still never had it right, as far as Jackie Cooper was concerned.
So he gave you a lesson in writing screenplays, right?
We sat down for 5 hours in his office in Hollywood one night from 7 to midnight, and we went over every line of the script. And he kept saying, this isn't right, this isn't right, this isn't right. You don't have this right. And I kept saying, yes, sir. I mean, I didn't know what else to say. And he would explain exactly why it was not right. And I really got a PhD in screenwriting that night.
And then taught it later, but Jackie Cooper taught him how to do it.
Right.
You need to tell the space story.
Yes, that's what I was
Yes,
trying
she
to
kind
get
of
at.
is
Oh, that's
trying to
good
get
too,
at that.
yes. So
In the New York,
Yeah,
when the
yeah,
agents
yeah.
look at screenplays, how do they?
I met the executive producer in New York and sat down with him in his office, and on his desk were piled up these scripts like this. And I said to him, look, I'm sorry to be nosy, but I've got to know, do you read all these things? He said, oh no. And I said, well, how do you go through them, or how do you pick anything? And he took a script down and he went like this. He said, white space. He said, if I find a script with lots of white space, which means there's no direction, which means there's no overwriting, he said, I'll read it. But if you have these dense passages, he said, I know the script's no good. It just isn't.
So you worked with an editor, and maybe can you talk about when you first met the editor that you worked with on this book?
Never met him.
You didn't meet him?
Nope, not with White Mama. The only communication I ever had with him was a copy of a letter he sent to my brother apologizing for leaving out the dedication.
What?
Yeah, that's true. There was a guy at Random House that just blew it and left out the dedication. And he wrote my brother a letter and apologized and moved on.
Because you dedicated it to your brother, or?
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't.
I did.
Well, we all know who Betty Davis is, but who is BT in real life? Did he go on to do anything else?
James Harden?
I don't know too much
Yeah,
about
he was in the Jeffersons for years.
Oh, okay.
He was the black kid in the Jeffersons. And then Barbara looked him up today.
Or yesterday.
He's 70.
He's 70, but he's had quite a career in various kinds of films.
Yeah, he just got.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing, wonderful.
I think Betty Davis got so many acclaims for White Mama because Betty Davis does. She's an icon. And nobody ever said much about Ernest Hardman's performance, but I thought he did a great job.
You're fantastic.
And we had one meeting when they were filming the fight scenes. They had a break, and they asked us if we wanted to come meet Betty Davis, and she was standing down near the room with Ernest talking, and we got to go down there and meet her. But what was so I was so frickin' young, and we both were. We had little kids at home in Arizona. What struck me is that in meeting us, she was totally in character. She never went out of the role in the film. So like this was a break, it was lunch break, they were all going to their trailers or whatever. But she came and met us, and I took a picture, and I can't find it.
Talk about what was happening in your life a little bit more. I mean, did you spend a lot of time in LA on the film set?
No.
What else was happening in your life as this famous author with a screenplay and a movie?
Teaching.
He was busting his butt.
How long did you spend in LA?
Oh, that time it was, I think 2.5 days. That was it. I mean, they didn't want you hanging around because they were doing something that they knew how to do, and you didn't. And they were very kind. They let us see what they called the dailies from the film and so on. But they were just very happy when we got out of there.
Yeah, we were clearly just show and tell. I mean, they took us into the cut room, and you spent time with Jackie Cooper, and he put up the day's cuts and talk to you about what he was doing, but he wasn't asking for his advice.
Certainly not.
At all. It was just,
Yeah.
and this is how I see this is how I see that. And all the filming, I think Carmen may have told you, was in LA, but it looks like New York because of the overriding shots. And so that's some of the
Okay.
pictures I brought, what the set looked like, which was pretty much a dump. I mean,
Yeah.
so, you know, we met her, but very briefly, and then she would go to her, but just in character, it still blows me away. You know, there was never sort of a, nice to meet you, how's your life in Arizona, do you have little kids, what's the deal, you know?
No, there was none of that.
No, it was just straight.
Method acting.
Method acting and very clearly that she loved what she was doing. She loved the book, she loved the screenplay,
Love the story.
she loved the story, and that was enough for us.
Yeah.
So you were talking about the set a little bit, and I don't know lots about the what people, different roles do. So there's a director, the screenwriter is you. How, you kind of mentioned it earlier, but how do they interact with each other? And do you think that the director needed to read the book to work on the
Uh,
screenplay?
I don't know if he ever read the book, but he was all over the screenplay because that's what he had to operate from. And he was very particular about everything in the screenplay. And he would show me places that I had overwritten. And it was really just an eye-opening, mind-opening thing where he would say, now, you don't visualize their faces here. You're not doing that because if you did, you would not have her say this. She would not have to say anything. And so it all came down to visualization, which I really had to learn much better than I instinctually could do it. So
So
he
a
made-
screenplay is mostly dialogue, and it has to be able to play in the mind of the director as making sense?
yeah,
Interesting, wow.
and
And I had to play through. Like, I was watching Betty Davis's face the other night, even as the film opens, and looking at her convey, if you wrote out, you know, Mrs. Malone is feeling da 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 da, you don't need any of it, you just give it to a good actress and it's all right there.
right.
It blew me away. So he had to create even more space than what he already had space. I told him that we should dig through and find that last screenplay, and he wouldn't let me do it.
You find
I
what?
said Carmen will like it. Huh?
To what?
The final, the final
Oh,
draft
yeah.
of the screenplay.
Yeah.
He just wouldn't look for it.
No,
Don't know what it is.
I get it. I mean, after writing the novel, which is enough, and then rewriting it 6 times, I mean, that's, I don't blame you for wanting.
I was pretty sick of it when we were all done.
I'm sure.
You know, when I was comparing the book to the movie, they cut the ladies, the bad ladies at the end, didn't they? Didn't they come and stay with her a little bit, or weren't they? And they didn't do that at the end of
No, they were circling
Movie.
outside.
Yeah, so I was just, that's the only thing I thought was a little different. Not no brainer.
Well, they could still make it living on the street.
Right, but I thought they were at one point to stay with him a couple of days, but maybe they didn't. I could be wrong. They stayed together.
Do you think Betty Davis got the character exactly perfect
Yes,
that you had in your head? You
absolutely.
did, she did, okay.
She knew that woman better than I did. She
Did
really
she read
did.
the book before?
Pardon?
Did she read the book? Or just,
I don't know. Um, it's quite possible that she read the manuscript because it didn't exist as a book
Oh, I
until
see.
after the film
right, you said,
was all done and wrapped. I think that she really only had the screenplay.
wow.
There wasn't a book until after the film was done.
You know what, I didn't understand that until just now. I guess
Yeah.
it didn't compute that
Yeah.
the screenplay really came before the book was
Yes,
published.
that's right.
It was just literally a manuscript
Yeah.
that went, wow, that's amazing.
Did you make any changes to the manuscript after the screenplay had been written and the movie produced, or
No,
did the manuscript go out?
no, because the book existed, it just wasn't published. So I didn't do anything to that. I just let it go, and the agent took it and said, okay. And he got a few bucks for it, and that was that. It was great. I had a wonderful experience with that book in terms of publishing it, because I had never seen the uh, finished paperback thing that you guys had. And we were driving cross country, and we had stopped in West or East Texas in a town called New Boston, and went into a Walmart to do something. I don't know what it was. And there it was, in a rack. And it was a wonderful feeling, that it had finally gotten out there.
And even to Texas.
And it had gotten to Texas. Wow. This is great. This little obscure town, and there it was in the paperback rack. And it was just wonderful to see it.
That had to feel amazing.
Actually, I bought a copy.
Did you?
Did you tell them that this is who
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Show your driver's license?
Yeah.
He never promotes himself.
No.
Never.
Like my dad.
Actually, I have some pictures over there, just as an aside. The bag ladies, would show up, having done their own costumes, just to see if they could be hired. And the very, big black lady who was Gorilla Sydney, she actually, in 1974, was on Broadway in the musical version of Raisin in the Sun, and she got a Tony for the lead in that. So these are people who were just like without a job at the time, so they scrounge around, try to imagine what a bag lady looks like, or do research. And I think I have pictures of 3 of them there. There were others in the film that I didn't get, because they weren't filming them the day that we were there. But I find that very interesting in terms of, an actor doesn't necessarily want to be out of work for a month or 2 months, and so they'll show up for a part like that.
So they came dressed as bag ladies?
Yes.
To try it out?
To
And then-
try out.
Yep, yep,
To audition, yeah.
Audition.
if they get hired or not, and then they just stick them in the flow of things, so.
So, talking about different characters, of that time, like the bag ladies, what do you recall from that time about any of the characters that you met, or any, like any interesting stories about, I mean, did you meet BT, or
Oh, yeah.
did you meet like, and you met several of the ladies who played the bag ladies, you
Mhm.
met Betty Davis, I mean, Anything, that strikes you from that time?
Not really. It was wonderful to meet them and see them and experience them and what they did in order to get the parts. Um, but there just wasn't really any time that we had in which we could exchange stuff or so on.
We were in no way the feature.
No,
He may have had to.
we were largely a pain in the ass.
Yeah, basically.
That's
We were
what we
just
were.
show them around, see what they need, and bye-bye, because they were filming, and so every minute, you know, they didn't want a relationship with us, they just wanted to say hi, thanks for your part in this, goodbye, we're filming now. So it was not,
Right.
yeah, you see what he looks like 40 years ago, and me too, in one of those pictures.
And you were teaching where?
University of Arizona, Tucson.
And you were teaching, what were you teaching?
Creative writing.
And we were young, he was under tremendous pressure when we moved from New Hampshire to Arizona. The University of Arizona said, okay, you have 2 books, but you need a third for tenure, so get working. And he had a full teaching load, and we had little kids, and I was working, and so our trip to California was like, who can we get to take care of the kids for 2 days, you know? I mean, it's the same thing any of you would go through.
So it wasn't glamorous?
Oh, God, no.
I would
Glamorous?
think it would be glamorous, but I guess not.
No. And when you meet Betty and you're like, you could tremble if they gave you an excuse, and she's in character, it's like, you know, you just move through it.
Yep.
I don't know, I can't think of another way to.
So, after the book came out and the movie came out, how was it received by the Black community and, in particular, the NAACP?
Oh, you're very kind.
She does her homework.
The,
You didn't tell them the questions before.
I did, we had, did a little pre-interview and then I based the questions from that.
well, it was nominated, as you know, for an NAACP Image Award and was a finalist. And I went out to Los Angeles for that. Immense party. I mean, huge. And,
Black tie.
oh yeah, it was black tie, the whole thing. And it lost to the Tuskegee Airmen. And I don't know if you guys know that story of the Tuskegee Airmen, but if it had to lose, that was the place to lose it to.
They're the Black Squadron.
Because that was the real thing.
Well, you were the real thing too, but they were more real thing.
Yeah, that's right. And I was not disappointed or anything. I thought that's just the way it ought to be. And was very pleased.
Would you want to talk about, so we have some regular questions that we talk about as part of our book club. And we can chat about that a little bit if you want. So to what extent are the characters in this book realistic and believable? So BT and Mrs. Malone and the Bag Ladies, and any thoughts on for us?
I thought they were very believable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was surprised how believable they were, actually. Like, just knowing the setup, I thought, okay, you know, it's not gonna be, the language is gonna be a little, Walt Disney-fied or something, for lack of a better word, you know, to make everybody happy, but it didn't. It was raw in places that it
Yes.
should have been raw.
Yes.
And I like that. I thought it was very good. Very, very good. Characters were fit and I loved how they changed places in their psyche. First, one was vulnerable and the other one wasn't, then the other one was vulnerable and this one wasn't, and they kept going back and forth with this. And I thought that was a wonderful dance in the book with the characters.
Thank you. It's
It was
great.
very good. I can't imagine how you pulled that off, but you managed to do it.
Yes.
Thank
I
you.
don't know,
And
if
the
they had
timing
the
was
fight
wonderful.
scene.
The fight
Pardon?
scene.
How did they do this fight scene? He certainly wasn't really beaten up, I mean, or was it?
Did you have experience
With
in
fights.
boxing or going to boxing?
I just made all that up, which if you've got authentic characters and you've established that, it means you've got the reader on a hook and you can do anything you want. And that's what I did. But as I said, I just made it up.
I love the lock scene where he has these lockpick tools and he goes and he is so proud of it. And he's like, look at these skills, and Mrs. Malone's reaction, and she's just like, what did I get myself into?
Yeah, yeah.
And the last place, the furniture, he took all the furniture out, and
Right.
and it was just to me that felt so authentic, and just really kind of the differences between the two of them, and the tension there was just really very fun to me.
I had a teacher at the Iowa workshop, it's now gone, who once made in class what I thought was just a wonderful observation. He said, and he wasn't talking to me, but he was talking to another young writer. He said, look, in fiction, things happen. And he was just like that. And it opened my mind to drama. And hence the furniture being gone. Things happen in fiction. And as you do your reading and so on, be mindful of that things happen. It's not a passive world in fiction. It is in real life to a certain extent, but not in fiction. Things happen.
Well, I don't know if you'll agree with me or anything, but I just kind of opened the book and said, read this book. So, okay, I just opened, I started reading. I was like, this is happening today. There are people, bag
Yes,
ladies, there's,
that's right.
I'm like, okay. And then he said, watch the film, and I was like, oh my goodness, this was, So I really, when I read the book, I thought it was happening today. And, it just
It's always
goes
happening.
across the decades, you
Yes.
know?
Yeah.
So it's really a wonderful kind of thing. It's, what are we going to do? And like, things happen. It's like, oh, just
It
gives
does
me
feel like
goosebumps.
It does feel like it stood up because it really felt, the story still feels true today.
Oh, I think so.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's very timely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you look at the posting on the video, it's still getting views, and it wasn't reposted that long ago. So
Right.
There are almost 4,000 on the new posting, and they're like 25. One of our daughters keeps track of it. She used to give him like an every 6-month report or whatever.
It got up to 38,000 views
Wow.
on YouTube. Something like
It's a
that.
very interesting movie. My husband, well, so we call it the daddy test, and so when he watches a movie, if he stays awake the entire movie, it passed the daddy test, and your movie passed the daddy test.
Oh, wow.
Okay, good. That's
Just saying.
comforting.
And it was late at night.
That's comforting.
So, just.
It's a vibe.
That's great.
So we talk about character development often in our books, and this is how, if at all, did the characters develop? So we've got E.T. and we have Mrs. Malone. So did we feel like the characters developed over time and matured maybe, or?
I think there was a development in understanding of each other's worlds and different perspectives, but that they were very similar. The similarities came out, I think. They learned the similarities between them, but it wasn't easy. Yeah. And I think they loved each other at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And because they were through all of this, and it was such an opportunity for them both to grow, which they didn't really want to do that. It was just a money-making thing for her, and you know,
We need a place
whatever
to
he
live.
had to do it, just
But they
whatever.
saved each other. They
Yeah,
saved each other.
and they had each other, and they made it work. And yeah, I think it was a lot of growth, psychological growth between the two people, and just understanding the poverty versus, you know, having what you need.
Mm-hmm.
And then she didn't have what she needed, so she was like him, and she understood where he was coming from in his reaction. So, and the back ladies, they were all amazing. You know, this.
And he understood
Great.
enough about her to know what she needed to leave the hospital. She needed
Yeah.
to
See.
believe that she had her home to go back to, otherwise she would have given up and never left the hospital. And he understood that about her at that point, which was
Yeah.
really very touching.
Yeah, that was really very touching. Yeah. And so how, like you were saying, how there's this kindness underneath
Mm-hmm.
this bravado and this black urban male thing that
Mm-hmm.
we do.
Right.
There's this
Right.
kindness underneath that is not portrayed unless you know them well.
Yep. Yep.
And so
Right.
these two characters knew each other well at that point, and
Well,
that
I
was a
just
really good
loved
scene.
her because she didn't baby him. You know, I think like even like somebody that's taking in a child will be like, oh, everything's, you know, okay. But when he said something, she was just like, okay, this is how it is.
Right.
And I just appreciated that
Yeah.
because
Right.
that's what you need. That's what they need. They need a lot of structure and
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I also thought it showed, you know, when someone's really down and out, it is hard to find help.
Yeah.
And how she called and she called people, and they just, you know, she ended up as a bag lady. Even the church wouldn't help her, you
Right.
know.
Right.
What's that?
$50.
Yeah, $50. So,
I found that very distressing. I had a little mini panic attack at that. Not a holy medical attack, but just a little time when she was becoming homeless and you knew that was going to be happening unless some miracle intervened, and then she was. And I had to take a little break because I found that very distressing, because there's so many people who are right on that edge, you know, living month to month in their income, and if some
Mm-hmm.
disaster happens, that could be them, could be homeless. So even though I was picturing this a few decades ago, I wasn't quite sure the decade it was supposed to be in. I could easily see that happening now as well. So.
That may be why it gets all the news it gets, because the issues, the dignity, the homelessness,
The high housing crisis we have now.
and the gaps
It's terrible.
between us color-wise, and you know, it's all still there.
Yes.
It's amazing that you allowed her to go on the street, because I guess
nowadays you would expect the writing to have something that snatched her back and she wouldn't be on the street. And I think that's part of what made the book really interesting too, because that allowed her to, you know, the people, the bag ladies that she saw and kind of shied away from before were her saviors to some extent, and they like helped her. And I don't think a lot of stories now would feel comfortable allowing that to happen, for her to go on the street, unless it was based on a true story. But as a fiction, a piece of fiction, I don't know, that's pretty brave. But that's what made the story.
Yeah.
Like you said, you know, you wanna write from
being honest.
honest, yeah, and you know, you didn't think about necessarily how it might be received, but you were just writing from a place of honesty, and I think that's what made the story, you know, like more engrossing.
I still remember that woman going up on the church steps. If it could happen to her, it can happen to Mrs. Malone.
Yeah.
9 degrees it was.
And I thought it was interesting how fast her health deteriorated.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, when I was a nurse's aide I was at the time, not yet in school, and I was working in an urban hospital in Milwaukee.
Mm.
And we were on the 5th floor. The 5th floor was where people were put when they came in off the street. And it's exactly right. They are really not good. Under bridges, they find them. You know, they have wounds and there's maggots in their wounds.
Sure.
There's just amazing things that you would never ever think of unless you saw this. You know, with roaches that come in everywhere. We have everything that you can imagine, and they live on the streets, and you know, it's still today.
And then they go back out in the street.
Yeah, discharged, they go right out and you
Well, they
patch them
closed
up,
a lot
send
of
them back,
places.
patch them up, send them back.
They closed a lot of the mental health hospitals, right? I know they did the major one in Harrisburg, the state hospital, they closed that down.
That's why we have so many nuns.
Well, I appreciated that you had all this wonderful story in just this tiny book. The not very many pages, but you got the
Yeah.
message across.
Yep.
And that's the kind of books I like to read.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah, every sentence is right there. Doesn't need any more. Yeah, it was great.
It's true.
Easy reading.
It's wonderful.
A lot of nice.
So we talk about the characters and a little bit of the flow of the book, maybe not as much, but you know, the book was also, did you find the book entertaining as well? I mean, was there what parts did you find entertaining? Like I love the lock scene personally.
The last scene?
The lock scene with the lock
Oh, yeah,
picking.
yes, we talked about that, yeah.
I like the scene where he's reading, he chooses a book of his own and starts reading it aloud and.
I like the bus.
Yeah, I thought that was
And he redid the
hilarious.
bus, the inside of the bus, I like that.
Yeah.
That was cool.
That was funny.
That was
And she closes the book up whenever he's reading that.
Oh, that one,
Yeah,
okay,
and she's
yeah.
like, we have other things we can read. Very cut and dry. I can imagine Betty Davis to read. She's like a perfect person.
Right.
So what is this word THIGH?
Yeah, that's it. That was very funny.
That was pretty funny. Yeah, the humor was really important.
Was.
Did you intend that to be funny, or you just like?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sure.
Right.
And it turned out that way too.
Oh yes.
I mean, what's a kid like BT gonna read?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, what he wants to read.
I love his name, cause she did, what's that name, you said Baby 10, isn't that right?
Your boy 10.
Boy
Boy
10,
10, Boy 10,
yeah.
okay.
Right.
Boy 10.
That also was pretty important in kind of setting up who BT was.
Right.
Right.
And he was just very matter of fact about who he was, and
But like initially his what was important to him was money, but then later on that changed and I like that too.
Mhm.
You know, I'm trying to remember it was what I'm trying to think about the word. What's the word? Uh it's not respect, it's like self-respect.
Dignity.
Dignity, thank you. You know, he had to get himself some of that.
That's right.
Did you ever think of writing a sequel?
Uh,
Him coming back from the army.
nope.
Okay.
No, I was done with that.
Okay.
And I was also done with, for some reason, I didn't dismiss it, it kind of left me, was after 2 books with major black characters. I got interested in other things.
Well, now you were involved with the BBC, is that?
Well, I wasn't involved with them so much as they wanted to do one of my books
Oh, okay.
really badly. Was a novel called Going Gently, and it was under option in this country for 4 or 5 years, and they they wanted to do it so badly that on the day the option ran out with some people in Hollywood, they wired the money to my agent that day to buy it.
Wow.
Not to take an option, to buy it. And so then they just took off with it, and it was a huge success in England.
They made a television film for the BBC, and it won 4 British Academy
5.
Awards for the 5, excuse
5.
me, for the
That's all right.
best television film of the year.
And it starred
Judi
Judi
Dench.
Dench.
Oh my word.
Of course.
Well, she was
Going Gently.
she won
Going
the
Gently, they changed it, okay.
the British Academy Award for the Best Supporting Actress. The, Going Gently is about 2 men dying of cancer and share the same hospital room while they are dying. And those men won nothing
Oh.
for their performances.
So their
0.
background wasn't dramatic acting, right?
The what?
Their background was not
No,
dramatic
they were 2 of the leading British comics of the time, and they got cast in this, and it was a brilliant casting because they were wonderful, just wonderful.
Can you find that now?
Yes.
I'll have to look for that.
I watched it.
Where?
It's YouTube as well.
It's on YouTube?
I think it was. Yeah, I
I
saw
didn't give
it.
you the DVD.
No?
Okay.
Oh.
It's in the Judi Dench collection also.
It is, yeah, it's true.
And you have another book that was made into
That was People's,
People's.
yeah.
So and who
LeVar Burton
LeVar Burton.
was
Ooh.
the star of that, and it was the first thing he did after Roots. I don't know, we're all old enough to remember Roots.
That was the next thing he did after Roots?
Yes.
Wow.
He was
I have
great.
not seen that one.
He was great.
And we did not meet LeVar, and we did not meet Judy.
Oh. Really good.
Exactly.
Well, both of them are still around. You can still do it. You're
Just
not
call
too
them up and say, hey.
Well, he's
We
on,
have a lot of time on our hands now. We could just come and meet you.
he's on Facebook with Ernest, and is LeVar on Facebook also?
Yeah.
Ernest,
Not Judi Dench.
YouTube, yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. When we talk about moral questions raised in the book, there's a lot of moral questions raised in the book. Were they resolved to your, what were they and were they resolved to your satisfaction? Anybody? A lot of moral questions in this book.
well, you have the education system in New York City to start out with. And she homeschooled BT, which I thought was wonderful. You have the you have the court system, the
Like social services.
social services. You have just well, poverty and homelessness. There's a lot of moral
How
questions.
about the way the doctor, no, it was a orderly or
Oh.
something, treated her when she went into the hospital.
What's this white woman to you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they got kicked out of the restaurant too.
Oh, right.
So, prejudicial issues.
There's not one of them that's not still today.
Mhm.
think
That's
about it.
exactly, yeah.
I thought the book handled all of those really, really well. I mean, it didn't answer them, but to the characters, the way the characters handled it, felt really true. I don't know. An overall take-home message. None of it solved. The story continues.
Never give up.
Never give up.
Yeah, never give up. That's a good one. You can close your ears. How likely are you to read another book by this author?
Oh, yeah. I got this started.
Yeah.
I wrote down that.
I got this started.
Do you have a book started now? Are you still
No.
writing?
No.
Mm.
No, I retired from writing pretty much when I left university. I know I don't look it, but I'm actually 85
Oh my goodness.
right now. And there are not a lot of 85-year-old writers
That doesn't mean there
publishing.
can't be.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
Maybe something will come.
That's true.
To you.
But the problem would be, in my situation, would be getting a publisher interested in a long-term commitment. Laugh. Come on.
Laugh.
Laugh, ladies.
Why does it have to be a long-term commitment?
Because that's how the publishing world works.
Huh.
It's exactly how they work. They want to nail you down as a writer
Young writer.
in your late 20s to mid 30s. And then they want very much to produce an audience for you. And if they can do that, they know they're going to sell 20,000 copies. All you got to do is write it. And that's the way it goes.
That doesn't seem right.
It is right, though. I mean, it's
No, I mean, I
it's
believe you,
business. It's business.
It doesn't seem.
Not art. Business.
Has
What
it
they want
changed
to do.
much in your lifetime?
Pardon?
Has it changed much, the publishing business? No,
Not that
it's been
I'm
pretty much the
aware
same.
of. No. Nope.
You have any thoughts on the writer's strike?
They'll fight it out somehow.
Do you think
Everybody-
AI is going to take over for the writers?
I doubt it. I doubt it. Might take over for the directors, but who knows?
I'm out of my questions, so. Any final questions for Bob?
Well, thank you so much for coming. I've
It was
enjoyed
very
this
interesting.
tremendously.
I loved it.
Agreeing to meet this small group.
Thanks.
Yeah, this is
Great
Wonderful
time.
having you. It was a great experience for
Uh,
us.
great time for me. Enjoyed it.
It was, and it was great to talk to Carmen and have her interest because after all this time, just the fact that there's a reading group who she loved the story, who are looking at the story, looking at the film. I mean, we have fans in the family, but other fans have died off. So
Aw.
it's been wonderful to hear him talk about these stories because our daughters are now in their late 40s, early 50s, and they don't know any of this. They were little kids when all this was going on, and we were trying to figure out how to afford to go to LA for 2 days and get a sitter and, just stuff you do when you're young. So I actually put his phone on record because I'm hoping I got something and they get to hear some of these stories because they've never
You
heard
could
them.
write another book about his life, right?
Yes.
An autobiography, and everybody else would know.
Yes.
Now, did you write at home, or did you have another place that you went
Oh,
to?
no, I wrote at home.
At home, so.
Yeah, I
were
always had
your
a-
daughters ever interested in, what's Dad doing over there?
Yeah, they were.
Uh-huh.
And I would say, Daddy's writing a novel. And they would say, oh, okay.
They didn't know what that was.
And that's exactly what it was. That's what Daddy does.
When can you come out and play?
I would love to look at some of the things you brought, if that's,
Oh, you want me to bring them over?
or maybe
Sure.
talk about it a little
That's
bit,
fine.
if that's okay with you.
Oh, yeah.
I don't wanna put you on the spot.
No, no, I put labels on everything, it's quickies.
Right.
Yes, please
Yeah,
get food.
bite too. Yeah, I got some more bites.
I'm still hungry because this is gonna be dinner.
Yeah.
I'm gonna grab one of these.
Want to meet dinner?
You want the beer?
Is this,
What?
is this
You couldn't eat
pineapple?
dinner.
Or
You
is
should
that
have
got
eat.
two?
No, you should
Do
eat.
you want some
Okay.
food?
No, I'm good.
Oh, you're good, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you both have seen this.
I did, yeah.
I don't know. This fingers. Oh, I didn't see that.
I just
Oh,
took one out of
Is
here.
this pineapple?
Okay,
Yeah, I
Looks
just took
very
a
good.
pineapple.